Hellblazer has the unique distinction of being the longest-running title published by Vertigo Comics. It began as a mainstream DC title with a mature reader's label, but it switched to Vertigo when that imprint was launched in 1993. While Sandman and its numerous spin-offs may have been the backbone of Vertigo, Hellblazer was its heart. When the series was cancelled in 2013, that seemed to signal the inevitable death of Vertigo itself. To examine this flagship Vertigo title, we have to look at the creation and the early appearances of John Constantine. Before that, a little housekeeping detail concerning the name Constantine, because I'm sure there will be numerous comments about it. The pronunciation was definitively settled by Rick Veitch in Swamp Thing number 73. Furthermore, in Hellblazer number 40, Jamie Delano wrote a song where Constantine rhymed with the word design. Although, in the movie and the short-lived TV show, it was pronounced Constantine, so there's confusion over the correct pronunciation. According to Neil Gaiman, the creator, Alan Moore, intended it to be pronounced Constantine. And Rick Veitch, who worked directly with Moore, also makes that pronunciation plain in Swamp Thing. So in comic book canon, Constantine is the correct version, and that's what I'm using for this video series. I'll probably make a mistake and not notice at some point, but that just proves I'm human and not AI. John Constantine, the lead character of Hellblazer, had an extensive history prior to his own solo series. Mainly, he was a supporting character during the Alan Moore and subsequent Rick Veitch runs. He continued to be a presence in Swamp Thing after his own series was launched, and he was integral to the beginning of the Books of Magic. Whenever a magic or occult character was needed for a Vertigo title, he was usually the first choice. The inspiration for John Constantine came from the artists Steve Bissette and John Toddleben. As Alan Moore said in 1993, quote, "I can state categorically that the character only existed because Steve and John wanted to do a character that looked like Sting. It struck me that it might be interesting for once to do an almost blue-collar warlock. Somebody who was streetwise, working class, and from a different background than the standard run of comic book mystics." Unquote. Constantine's first appearance was in Swamp Thing number 37. That issue is a basic setup for the forthcoming American Gothic story. In it, Constantine will act as both a mentor and a manipulator of Swamp Thing. He reveals and withholds information to get Swamp Thing to follow his agenda. Most importantly, in issue 46, Constantine directs Swamp Thing to the Parliament of Trees. It's here he learns of his true origin and purpose. This is a significant development that will affect the character and his portrayal forever. So in the Swamp Thing mythos, Constantine was a very important part. In the following decades, they continue to be allies, but it is a very strained relationship. During this run, Moore introduced the side characters in Constantine's world and a vital element to the beginning of Hellblazer, Newcastle. Newcastle is not filled in whatsoever. It's name-dropped multiple times, and it's implied Constantine and his crew experienced something terrible there. It's a detail that gives one the impression that Constantine has lived a pretty full life before entering the Swamp Thing series. Overall, Constantine is a well-connected warlock and a cynical occult detective. He's an old-school, working-class punk that fell into his calling. He knows a bit too much, but not as much as he'd like. If he has any magical powers, they aren't immediately obvious. Although, he does seem to be able to quickly travel from location to location without any difficulty. He's sardonic, doesn't care for America too much, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to save the world from itself. Due to John Constantine's popularity, it was decided to give the character his own ongoing series. The creator, Alan Moore, was not interested in doing it. Not to mention, he was too busy wrapping up Swamp Thing, writing Miracle Man, dealing with the success of Watchmen, and finally finishing V for Vendetta. Around this time, he was also disillusioned with DC itself and was beginning to withdraw from any involvement with that company. British writer Jamie Delano had proposed a number of projects to DC at this point, and he was selected as the writer for the new, ongoing series. While Delano had an extensive resume, including work for 2000 AD, Doctor Who, and Captain Britain, Hellblazer was his first work for an American publisher. Some sources suggest Alan Moore recommended Delano for the series, but I couldn't confirm this information. Delano stated, quote, "I was offered the chance by Karen Berger to develop Moore's John Constantine into the lead of an ongoing monthly. It was felt a British writer was required for that putative title, and I guess I was handy and fit that description." Unquote. According to Delano, he wasn't convinced it was an idea that had great appeal, and he thought the series would last about 12 issues. With some input from Moore and Berger, Delano loosely plotted that first year. Emphasis on loosely. Delano is an organic writer who follows the story wherever it goes and plans very little in advance. So for the majority of the series, he had no overall plan. Furthermore, he had no editorial interference and was allowed to take the series in whatever direction he wanted. As for why the title is Hellblazer and not the more obvious title Hellraiser, that's due to the Clive Barker movie that debuted in 1987. This was an editorial decision Delano was highly ambivalent about. The first year is very demon-related, and at first, seems to be an exploration of the 7 deadly sins. It begins with the demonic Lord of the Flies that inspires gluttony. Then it moves to greed, as personified by yuppie Hellspawn, who trades souls on the afterlife stock market. The remainder of that first year is Constantine finding himself in the middle of a holy war between a religious group trying to bring about the Second Coming and the Damnation Army, who are guided by Nurgle, a demon Constantine has known for years. This leads to one of the best single-issue stories in the Hellblazer run, Newcastle. Newcastle takes place in 1978, and it involves a younger, overconfident Constantine and his friends attempting to banish a demon. This attempt goes very, very poorly for them. Newcastle is one of the defining moments in Constantine's life, and it will haunt him for years. It's a touchstone moment that is highly important to Constantine's development. The first year, and Delano's run in general, is distinctly British. While Constantine does travel a few times to America as a way to maintain continuity between his solo series and his appearances in Swamp Thing, it is exclusively set in England. It also deals with British social concerns, like the Thatcher administration and its policies. The language is peppered with slang that's not filtered for a North American audience. It feels like a highly authentic experience. It sets the tone for the entire series. The next major story is The Fear Machine. This turns out to be a Masonic plot to raise one of their deities. It is suitably apocalyptic and somewhat reminiscent of everything Grant Morrison tried to do with The Invisibles, except far more coherent and a lot shorter. At one point, there's a very rare appearance of Morpheus. This throwaway scene ties into Constantine's appearance in the 3rd issue of Sandman. This is followed by a single-issue story about Constantine hanging out with a man that's a work of fiction. It's very metatextual, and once again, very reminiscent of the Mike Carey series, The Unwritten. Delano would take a break at this point, and both Grant Morrison and Neil Gaiman would step in to write a few issues. Morrison's story is clearly influenced by their childhood. It involves a village near an atomic plant and an episode of madness. It's not overly compelling, but it has great David Lloyd art. Gaiman's story is an empathetic look at homelessness and how these people are overlooked and ignored. When Delano returned, he did a short, unusual arc called Family Man. It involved nothing supernatural whatsoever, but it maintained a horror theme. In it, Constantine finds himself being hunted by a prolific serial killer. This leads to the death of Constantine's father, and him taking extreme measures to ensure his safety. As a trivial aside, the Family Man is name-checked in issue 14 of Sandman. He's the missing person at the serial killer convention. So for those wondering why, the Family Man never appeared at that convention, it's because he was taken out in Hellblazer. Dick Foreman provided a fill-in issue about a demonic junkyard dog before Delano returned to conclude his run on the title. At this point, it seems like Delano is running out of enthusiasm for the series. The first few years, he appeared to have a point of view to express, specifically about the state of England. But after that, it seems like Delano is struggling to continue along that foundational theme. However, there is a narrative thread about character discovery. In The Family Man, Constantine was forced to take a human life, which was vastly different than exorcising a demon or other supernatural entities. Worse yet, this wasn't the first time he committed murder. While it was known his mother died giving birth to him, what was unknown is that Constantine was a twin. He had, in fact, murdered his twin. In essence, he's an incomplete person that took a life in order to begin his life. In the finale, Constantine tries to reconcile or make amends with that twin. It ends on a very ambiguous note that's open to interpretation. The two may have become a new, complete entity known as John Constantine, where there was an understanding of some nature between them. Either way, it reads like the end of the series, even though, of course, it wasn't. But there is definitely a sense of closure. Delano adds something that other writers will pick up on and exploit. That would be, Constantine is frequently desperate and out of his depths. While he is a conman that manipulates people and always seems to be in control, more often than not, he's barely holding on. His main feature is exploitation. If he sees any vulnerability in either his friends or foes, he'll use that to his own ends, regardless of the consequences to others. His reflex action is to sacrifice anyone and everything to achieve a certain outcome. His victories are almost always bittersweet and filled with ongoing consequences. Constantine knows he's damned. When his mortal life is over, his afterlife is going to be an eternity of unbelievable suffering. With that in mind, he displays an interesting characteristic. He's not on a lifelong redemption arc. Certainly, sometimes he achieves redemption, but usually it's revenge. He's not a character out to do more good than evil. He's someone who does what's necessary, regardless of the moral or ethical implications. Delano added a circle of acquaintances, and he gave Constantine a family. He has a married sister, Cheryl, and a niece, Gemma, who will become a supporting character much later in the series. His father becomes an unfortunate casualty, and it's learned his mother died giving birth to him. And there's Constantine's twin, who never made it to term. Finally, Delano adds Chaz Chandler, who acts as Constantine's taxi service and who may be his only actual friend. While Constantine may move in supernatural circles, there's a grounded support system to remind him that he does what he does to protect them. The artists during this portion of the series were many and varied. The original artist, John Ridgway, was a very good choice to give Hellblazer a lived-in British feel. This was an ideal combination. His style gave the material a gritty and dark tone. The following artist, Richard Piers Rayner, had a vastly different, more realistic style. It was quite detailed, and he did a good job illustrating the more horrific or existential scenes. But it was hard not to notice there was a lot of empty space. That is, there was more light than dark. It seemed unbalanced in that respect. Great art, but it was a touch too bright for the material. After Rayner, there was a variety of artists that were just okay. There's some early Sean Phillips, whose style is still developing, but there are glimpses of the greatness he'll eventually achieve. Otherwise, the artwork for the remainder of Delano's run was competent. Steve Pugh came in much later, and he would have been a good permanent choice for Delano's work. Unfortunately, at that point, Delano was winding the series down. In the end, Delano provided an excellent foundation for others to work from. He added a level of definition that others would use to varying degrees. In my opinion, Delano's version is the most relatable human version. Constantine may be a clever bastard, but like the rest of us, he always feels that existential dread that he's one moment away from losing everything and everyone. Thank you for watching. This is part 1 of numerous parts covering the entire 300-issue run of Hellblazer. That's going to take some time, but of course, if this video suddenly does well, I'd be highly motivated to finish it as soon as possible. So please give this video a like, leave a comment, and if you're not subscribed, do that too. Let this platform know there's demand for this type of material, because, well, the past month has been pretty rough for this channel, and I definitely need any and all support. A link to my Patreon is down below, and I would be grateful if you could back my humble efforts. My goal is to do this full-time and produce even more work. There's a lot of projects I'd like to do, but I'm not at a point where I can do them. So that's my pitch. Please support this channel. With that said, thanks to all my fine supporters on YouTube and Patreon. I highly appreciate that ongoing support. You do make it possible for this channel to continue, and I cannot stress that enough. Thank you so very, very much. Extra special thanks to Jeff Nicholson, Sicken, Francis De La Cruz, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrews, Corey Drew, Ellis Gregor, Alexa Zernish, Brian Deaton, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient.